Welcome back to part 2 of our journey through China's history. In the first part, we explored ancient China and its dynastic years, laying the foundation for the civilization we know today. Now, in this part, we'll focus on more recent events, covering the early 20th century through the rise of modern China. From internal struggles and foreign invasions to the rise of both nationalist and communist movements, this period was crucial in shaping the nation. For more details, I recommend visiting Britannica.com for comprehensive information. Don't forget to subscribe for more history contents. The early Republican period. The development of the Republic 1912-20. In the early 20th century, China experienced the gradual collapse of its old political system, paving the way for the formation of a new society. Foreign political ideas weakened the traditional government structure, nationalism emerged as a driving force, and civil wars, along with the Japanese invasion, further destabilized the country, hindering its modernization. Despite the revolution leading to the establishment of a republic, China lacked the foundations for a democratic system. The revolution concluded with a three-part agreement. The Qing dynasty abdicated. Sun Yat-sen stepped down from the provisional presidency in favor of Yuan Shikai, who was seen as essential for restoring national unity, and Yuan pledged to establish a republican government. However, this placed an autocrat at the helm, and the revolutionaries held only a minority position in the new government. Early power struggles. The early years of the Republic were marked by ongoing disputes between Yuan Shikai and the former revolutionaries over control of the government. The conflict began with the election of the National Assembly in February 1913, where the Nationalist Party Kuomintang KMT, largely composed of former revolutionaries, won a significant majority. This parliament was tasked with drafting a permanent constitution. Song Jiaoren, the KMT's chief architect, advocated for executive power to rest with the cabinet accountable to parliament, not the president. In March 1913, Song was assassinated, and evidence pointed to the involvement of the premier and possibly Yuan himself. Parliament attempted to block Yuan's effort to secure a $125 million loan from a group of foreign banks, but Yuan proceeded with the deal in April. He also dismissed 3 KMT-aligned military governors. In response, revolutionary leaders organized the Second Revolution against Yuan, but his military forces quickly quelled the uprising. Sun Yat-sen, a leading revolutionary, fled to Japan. Yuan then forced parliament to formally elect him as president on October 10, the second anniversary of the revolution's start. By this time, his government had received recognition from most foreign nations. When parliament introduced a constitution giving executive power to a cabinet responsible to the legislature, Yuan dismissed the KMT members, accusing them of involvement in the recent uprising. He dissolved parliament on January 10, 1914, and appointed a new body to draft a constitution according to his own terms, effectively turning the presidency into a dictatorship. After World War I began in 1914, Japan joined the Allies and took control of the German leasehold at Jiaozhou Bay, as well as German-owned railways in Shandong. China was not allowed to intervene. On January 18, 1915, Japan secretly presented Yuan Shikai with the 21 demands, which essentially aimed to make China a Japanese dependency. Yuan skillfully handled the negotiations to limit the concessions, which focused on granting Japan increased access to Chinese ports and railways, and influence over Chinese political and law enforcement matters. Meanwhile, Yuan sought support from other foreign nations. European powers, preoccupied with the war, could not challenge Japan, and the United States chose not to get involved. However, the Chinese public became outraged, and most of Yuan's political opponents backed his resistance to Japan's demands. Despite this, Japan issued a 48-hour ultimatum on May 7, forcing Yuan to accept the terms as they stood. As a result, Japan gained significant privileges and concessions in Manchuria, northeast China, and confirmed its control over Shandong, previously taken from Germany. The Hanyeping mining and metallurgical enterprise in the Middle Yangtze Valley was turned into a joint Sino-Japanese venture. China also agreed not to lease any harbors, bays, or islands along its coast to other foreign powers, and not to allow any foreign nation to build a dockyard, coaling station, or naval base in Fujian, the province closest to Japan's colony in Taiwan. Yuan's attempts to become emperor. After Yuan Shikai attempted to revive the monarchy and crown himself emperor, opposition arose from Japan, political leaders, and military forces. In December 1915, Sun Yat-sen's allies and the National Protection Army, led by Cai Tang launched a rebellion in Yunnan. The revolt spread across southern China, with Japan covertly supporting the rebels. By March 1916, public and military opposition forced Yuan to abandon his empire, but demands for his resignation persisted. Gravely ill, he died on June 6. His rule left China with increased foreign debt, political instability, and the rise of warlordism. Vice President Li Yuanhong took over, with Duan Qirui as premier, but power struggles within the Beiyang army continued, leaving governance uncertain. Formation of a rival southern government. In July, Sun Yat-sen, supported by parts of the Chinese Navy and about 100 members of parliament, attempted to establish a rival government in Guangzhou. The initial funds for this initiative, known as the Movement to Protect the Constitution, were likely provided by the German consulate in Shanghai. On September 1, the Rump Parliament in Guangzhou created a military government and appointed Sun as commander-in-chief. However, real power rested with the military leaders, who only nominally supported Sun. The southern government declared war on Germany on September 26 and unsuccessfully sought recognition from the Allies as the legitimate government. The Constitution Protecting Army, made up of southern troops, launched an attack on the Beijing government and managed to push northward through Hunan. Sichuan also became involved in the conflict. Duan, the Beijing leader, tried to suppress the southern opposition by force, while Feng supported a peaceful resolution. Duan eventually resigned and used his influence to push Feng into ordering military action. General Cao Kun took command of the campaign and expelled the southern forces from Hunan by the end of April 1918. In May, the southern government was reorganized under a 7-member directorate, with military leaders holding the dominant positions. As a result, Sun left Guangzhou and returned to Shanghai. Though his first attempt to establish a government in the south failed, it set the stage for a long-lasting division between the north and south. Wartime changes. Although China's wartime participation was limited, it gained former German and Austrian concessions and cancelled unpaid Boxer indemnities. However, Japan expanded its influence by securing railway concessions in Shandong, Manchuria, and Mongolia through the Nishihara loans, which strengthened the Anhui clique. The 1917 Lansing-Ishii Agreement further legitimized Japan's special interests in China. Economically, reduced foreign competition allowed native industries to grow, increasing the industrial labor force to 1.75 million by 1918, while modern Chinese banks expanded in number and capital. Intellectual movements. A new group of intellectuals emerged in China as a result of educational reforms and the abolition of the imperial examination system in the late Qing period. These changes enabled many young Chinese to study subjects like science, engineering, medicine, law, economics, education, and military strategy in Japan, while others studied in Europe and the United States. Upon returning, they took on important roles in society and became key advocates for modernization. Their writings and teachings had a profound influence on the next generation of students. By 1915-16, China had around 130,000 modern schools with over 4 million students. However, this transformation was mainly confined to urban areas, leaving rural communities largely unaffected, though they experienced an increase in tenancy and worsening poverty, leading many to migrate to cities, join the military, or turn to banditry. An intellectual revolution, the first decade of the Republic saw a significant intellectual shift, known as the New Culture Movement. Led by progressive thinkers, this movement critically assessed traditional Chinese values and institutions. Inspired by ideas of individual freedom, equality, scientific inquiry, and pragmatism, these intellectuals sought more profound reforms than those achieved through the self-strengthening movement or the Republican Revolution. Their focus was on reforming the education of China's youth. In September 1915, Chen Duxu, who had studied in Japan and France, founded Xinqingnian Ni Youth magazine. Initially, the magazine aimed to oppose Yuan Shikai's monarchical ambitions and inspire young people. It quickly became the most influential publication of its kind. By 1917, the journal began embracing the radical ideas of newly appointed faculty members at Peking University Beta, where Chen was dean of the College of Letters. The university itself was undergoing a transformation under Chancellor Tsai Yuanpei, who had studied in Germany and sought to make Peking University a center of academic research and progressive education. Students became deeply involved in the New Culture movement. One of the most influential proposals came from Hu Xiao, a former student of American philosopher John Dewey, who argued for replacing classical Chinese with the vernacular language Baihua in literature. This idea gained widespread support, and by 1918, most Xinjiangian contributors were writing in Baihua, prompting other publications to follow suit. Students at Peking University also launched their own reformist publication, Xinqiao New Tide, and experimental literature inspired by Western styles became increasingly popular. The movement's influence spread, leading to the rise of numerous literary journals during this period. The interwar years 1920 to 1937, the beginnings of a national revolution. The new wave of revolution in China was driven by both the Nationalist Party KMT and the Chinese Communist Party CCP. The Nationalist Party KMT. The KMT originated from the United League Tang Ming, which had opposed the Qing dynasty. It officially adopted the name Nationalist Party in 1912, but after being suppressed by Yuan Shikai. Some of its elements were reorganized by Sun Yat-sen in 1914 as the Chinese Revolutionary Party. However, this attempt failed to gain significant support. The surge of patriotism in 1919 inspired Sun and his supporters to revive both the KMT name and its political ideology. The party's publications became more active, engaging in discussions about how to save China. Many of Sun's followers were drawn to socialism. The process of creating an effective political party took time. Sun returned to Guangzhou in late 1920 after Chen Jiangming had expelled the Guangxi militarists. Another factional parliament elected Sun as the president of a new southern government, which claimed to be China's legitimate ruling authority. In early 1922, Sun attempted a northern military campaign in alliance with Zhang Zuolin, a Manchurian warlord, to fight the Zhili clique, which controlled Beijing. However, Chen opposed the use of provincial revenue for such military conflicts. On June 15 to 16, 1922, one of Chen's subordinates expelled Sun from his presidential residence in Guangzhou, forcing him to seek refuge with the Southern Navy before retreating to Shanghai on August 9. In February 1923, Sun returned to Guangzhou, where he began consolidating power and rebuilding the KMT. The Chinese Communist Party CCP. The CCP emerged directly from the May 4th movement. Its early leaders and members were primarily professors and students who advocated for social revolution and saw Soviet Russia as an inspiring model. Though Chinese students in Japan and France had previously studied socialist theories and Karl Marx's ideas, the 1917 Russian Revolution renewed their interest in radical ideologies. Li Dezhou, a Peking University librarian, and Chen Duxu co-founded the CCP. In March 1920, news of Soviet Russia's revolutionary foreign policy reached China through the First Karakan Manifesto, which pledged to renounce all imperialist privileges Russia had gained in China and to return the Chinese Eastern Railway in Manchuria without compensation. This contrasted sharply with the Versailles Treaty's decision to award Shandong to Japan, which had sparked massive 1919 protests. Although the Soviet government later retracted parts of its promise and attempted to regain the railway, its initial anti-imperialist stance left a positive impression on many Chinese nationalists. In 1919, Soviet Russia established the Comintern, an international communist organization, and in 1920, it sent Gregory N. Voitinsky to China. Voitinsky met with Li Dezhou in Beijing and Chen Duxu in Shanghai, leading to the formation of the Socialist Youth League, the groundwork for the Communist Party, and the recruitment of young intellectuals. By 1921, about 50 members were active across China and Japan, many of whom had been involved in the 1919 protests. Mao Zedong, a protege of Li Dezhou, founded a group in Changsha. The first Congress of the CCP took place in Shanghai in July 1921, attended by 12 or 13 members, along with a Dutch communist, Hendrikus Sneevliet Maring, and a Russian advisor. Maring, who had become the head of the Comintern's China Bureau, had arrived in Shanghai in June 1921. At the Congress, Chen Duxiu was chosen as the party leader. For the next 2 years, the CCP focused on recruitment, spreading Marxist ideology, opposing foreign imperialism and Chinese militarism, and organizing labor unions in the railway and factory sectors. Ming played a key role in fostering collaboration between the CCP and KMT to create a national revolutionary movement. Some young communists were sent to the Soviet Union for training. Many early CCP members had studied and worked in France, where they were exposed to the French labor movement and the French Communist Party. Notable among them was Zhou Enlai. Others were influenced by Japanese socialism. By 1923, the CCP had approximately 300 members, with an additional 3,000 to 4,000 members in its Socialist Youth League. The nationalist government from 1928 to 1937. One of the biggest challenges facing the new nationalist government was ongoing military separatism. The government had little control over vast regions in western China, and even parts of eastern China were under the authority of independent regimes that had recently been part of the nationalist coalition. After failing to negotiate, Chiang Kai-shek launched a series of civil wars against his former allies. By 1930, many of the militarist regimes had been reduced to provincial levels, and the influence of Nanjing was spreading. Chiang's success was largely due to the financial strength of his base in Jiangsu and Zhejiang and the support of foreign arms. Recognition from foreign powers quickly brought the nationalist government the revenue collected by the efficient maritime customs service, and when China gained the right to set its own tariff schedules, this revenue increased. Although the nationalist government claimed to aim for constitutional and representative government, it was essentially controlled by Chiang Kai-shek. The army and civil bureaucracy were divided by factions, which Chiang carefully balanced to keep ultimate decision-making in his hands. The Kuomintang KMT was supposed to infuse all government institutions and provide leadership, but the army became the dominant force in government. Chiang's regime was heavily military-oriented, a trend reinforced by external factors. Despite this, the nationalists made strides in creating a modern government, developing a coherent banking and monetary system, and improving taxation. They expanded public education, built a network of transportation and communication infrastructure, and promoted industry and commerce. However, these improvements mainly benefited urban China, while little was done to modernize agriculture or address issues like disease, illiteracy, and underemployment in rural areas. With conscription and high taxes to fund civil wars, and a collapsing export market for commercial crops, rural economic conditions likely worsened during the nationalist decade. In the early years of their rule, the nationalists had some success in reasserting China's sovereignty. Several foreign-controlled areas were returned to China, and the foreign powers agreed to China's restoration of tariff autonomy. However, these were mostly symbolic gains, and the unequal treaties were largely untouched. The country was filled with nationalistic sentiment, determined to resist foreign political and economic influence. Manchuria, a rich region in northeastern China, had long been under Japanese control, which included economic privileges in the Liaodong Peninsula and the South Manchurian Railway. The Chinese began developing Huludao, a port in Liaodong, to compete with Japan's Dalian port and planned railways to challenge Japanese dominance. Zhang Zuoliang, the son and successor of Zhang Zuolin, the former ruler of Manchuria, was growing closer to Nanjing and supported the nationalists' goal of ending foreign privileges in China. For Japan, Manchuria was considered crucial. Many Japanese believed Japan should lead Asia against the West, and the economic struggles brought on by the Great Depression, along with social unrest, fueled the belief that Japan's power needed to be consolidated in Manchuria. This sentiment was particularly strong among the officers of the Kwantung Army, which was responsible for protecting Japan's leasehold in the Liaodong Peninsula and the South Manchurian Railway. Japanese aggression. In September 1931, a group of officers from the Kwantung Army initiated a plot, starting with the Mukden incident, to force the Japanese government to expand its influence in Manchuria. As a result, Japan gradually became involved in the conquest of Manchuria and the establishment of a puppet state called Manchukuo. China was unable to prevent Japan from taking control of this crucial region. In 1934, following lengthy negotiations, Japan acquired the Soviet stake in the Chinese Eastern Railway, effectively removing the last legal traces of Soviet influence in the area. Between 1932 and 1935, Japan continued to seize additional territory along Manchuria's borders. In 1935, Japan attempted to separate Hebei and the Chahar region of Inner Mongolia from the control of the Nanjing government, while also threatening Shaanxi, Shandong, and the Sichuan region of Inner Mongolia. The nationalist government's strategy was to buy time to strengthen its military power and unite the country, with the slogan "Unity before resistance" mainly aimed at the Chinese communists. The communists had established 15 rural bases in central China and founded a Soviet government, the Jiangxi Soviet, on November 7, 1931. In these regions, the communist leadership redistributed land and gained support from the poorer classes. The Japanese occupation of Manchuria, along with a smaller conflict around Shanghai in 1932, distracted the nationalists and gave the communists an opportunity to expand. However, in late 1934, the nationalists forced the communist armies to abandon their bases and retreat. Many future communist leaders, such as Mao Zedong, Zhu, Zhou Enlai, Liu Shaoqi, and Lin Bao, embarked on the Long March, a difficult journey across western China. By mid-1936, the remaining communist forces had gathered in the impoverished northern Shaanxi region, with their headquarters in the town of Yan'an, which would later be associated with the period of CCP development from 1936 to 1945. During the Long March, Mao Zedong rose to the forefront of the CCP leadership. In the early 1930s, he had been engaged in intense power struggles within the party and was relatively weak at the beginning of the Long March. However, by January 1935, a meeting of the CCP's political bureau confirmed Mao's new position as chairman. It was also during the Long March that the CCP developed a new political strategy, a united front against Japan. Initially, this was envisioned as an alliance of patriotic forces against both Japan and the nationalist government. But as Japanese pressure on China intensified and the nationalist forces mounted further pressure on the weakened communist armies, the communists called for a united front of all Chinese against Japan. This appeal gained support from various classes and local regimes, leading the communists to moderate their revolutionary agenda and cease class warfare in their controlled areas. Chiang Kai-shek, however, was determined to continue his campaign against the communists. He ordered Zhang Zuoliang's Manchurian army and Yang Hukeng's northwestern army to attack the communist forces in northern Shaanxi. Many officers in these armies sympathized with the communist slogan "Chinese don't fight Chinese," preferring to fight Japan instead, especially the Manchurian soldiers who had been displaced. Zhang Zuoliang secretly negotiated with the communists and had suspended the civil war. In December 1936, Chiang flew to Xi'an to order Zhang and Yan to resume the anti-communist campaign. Under pressure from his subordinates, Zhang detained Chiang on December 12, an event that became known as the Xi'an Incident.